Welcome to Synthesis. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this program is about combining the contradictions of the world and taking us to a new level. You have a thesis, you have an antithesis, and then you have a synthesis. And tonight's guests, some of my favorite people, they're going to be talking about a new level of consciousness, which is a synthesis of a new humanity. So I'll be talking to my good friends, Dr. Desiree Hurtak and Dr. J.J. Hurtak, the heads and founders of the Academy for Future Science. Your work is about combining consciousness and science, and it's about bringing people to a new level. So what's a easy way to start people on this understanding of consciousness and science combined together?
Well, some of our work has been with remote viewing, as you know, Alan. And this is the idea that someone could be here in California and remote view to someone who's there in New York. And they actually can see and know what's going on. And Russell Targ, a very good friend of ours, actually did a study that it's not a sending and a receiving of information, which most people hearing that would think. But what it is almost like a linkage of space and time. He calls it eighth space for eighth dimensional reality. So in a sense, it's saying all of the space around us is part of a unity. We're all interconnected to it.
Well, yeah, no, I was going to ask JJ, then the science of non-local consciousness as you see it, lay that out for us, please.
Well, going back to the 1930s, Einstein and Rosen came up with this called by their names, the Einstein-Rosen bridge. The fact that two particles can interconnect instantaneously, the same applies to the human creation. And we have found through our research with very eminent scientists at Stanford Research Institute in California, as well as scientists working with various think tanks throughout the world, that indeed we can connect as non-local beings of consciousness. We're here, but we are someplace else. In essence, we are beginning to realize that we are a multidimensional creation, rediscovering itself.
But let's talk about the science of that, like how we can make sense of it for a new paradigm that needs science to be convinced of its reality.
Well, some of the early experiments were done by Einstein and some of the ideas of Bell. This is a person who lived some years ago. But now it's being done at the University of Geneva by a named Nicholas Gieshen. And his work has shown that you can actually split a particle in half, 18 kilometers apart, and they interact almost simultaneously, even though they're not touching each other. And you know, the whole concept now that just came out of cosmic inflation actually lends to this credibility. This is what's so exciting about it, because quantum physicists are saying this is great, because it means that instead of this big bang, as we were talking about in the past, that it was a smaller bang, and these particles were probably more interrelated or interconnected than we think. So that means that, in a sense, there was only maybe a very small space at one point, and everything was so interconnected. Now we're all part of that.
So in terms of consciousness, Dr. Hurtak, is space an illusion? Is that what you're sort of saying?
The space-time paradigm or construct is an arbitrary creation, and in that sense, it's an illusion. Our work is based upon what I will call an unbounded holism, the fact that we are capable of transcending the local paradigms of space-time and understanding that we have the ability to be connected with the universal global mind of all human intelligence waking up and using other levels of consciousness energy. We would call it other spectrums of information to tap into, to magnify, and in essence create what I would call a mind to reality, a mind that is no longer seen as something encased within the brain, but a mind that anticipates events before they happen.
Just to say, Dr. Hurtak is a mystic as well, and he's not just talking from theory. I would love for you to relay your experience where the revelations of the non-local awareness gave you a real experience with your body. Can you just relay that?
Well, I was trained both in the social sciences, a linguist, as well as working with other areas of philosophy, both in the Eastern tradition and the Western tradition. At an early point in my life, I began to combine what we will call the features of transformational linguistics, the use of mantric sounds or expressions, and I reached a point of a morphogenic opening that took place when I was able to harmonize within myself certain sound patterns. And this created a door, perceptual door, through which a being of light, we would call this in the terminology of the Enochian teachings that Desiree and I represent, a whole light being.
Wait, more than a perceptual door, an actual door in time-space opened to you when you created this right combination of syllables.
Through which I was bilocated into another dimension. And in that other dimension, I was given scenario abstracts or mental pictures through which I was shown different scientific levels of information pertaining to the future of humanity. And over the last 40 years, Desiree and I have traced this through well-known scholars, even Elizabeth Rauscher, a leading mathematician, physicist, and we will be publishing with her a book dealing with some of the experiments of SRI, but also our own experiments of mind projection or consciousness raising between the United States and various targets, such as in Egypt, Israel, and other parts of the world.
But what did you find in that higher state of consciousness, like concrete, that people can connect with?
The fact that we are part of a very dynamic universe that was inhabited, that we are basically one form of evolution, which is a sub-part of a much greater or higher evolutionary process that involves us in a schoolhouse of knowledge, and we're just waking up to the fact that we're about to graduate into the cosmic university.
And the idea is that there is this greater consciousness field around this planet and really throughout the whole universe, and that beings exist like us in those other spaces. Some of them are 3, 4th dimensional beings like we are today, but others are even 5th, 8th, 24th dimensions. They can go from here, they can travel through hyperspace. These all sound very strange, but scientists now, today, are starting to look at the possibilities of us being able to travel in hyperspace.
Well, after your experience, you downloaded, or if you want to call it that, this incredible book called The Keys of Enoch Book of Knowledge, which is in a sense a guide to a multidimensional reality of an omniverse, meaning that we are living in parallel universes that are all colliding within the center of consciousness, if you want to call it.
Yes, and I'd like just to quote one section from the book. I'm reading from section 313. Thus, the direct relationship between the size of the universe, that is our physical universe, the diameter of the proton, and our range of vision is part of a larger mass, energy, space-time transformation, which involves changes in our basic concept of the known universe. And so the Keys of Enoch, this title of this book, Book of Knowledge, presents a new consciousness cosmology, that we're here, but we're also cosmic citizens aware of other conscious realities that we are able to now dip into and circumnavigate through as we allow our consciousness experience to connect with parallel levels.
Well, yeah, I mean, saying that's just the point of the show that we're doing is how do we start to activate those higher levels of consciousness?
Well, first of all, it comes from understanding that space as we know it, we can transcend. In other words, we can travel from here to another place, perhaps by hyperspace or by the experience Dr. Hurtak had. Or, in addition to that, time. Many people have had deja vu experiences, and people often wonder, how could we see something that's going to happen in the future? Well, we're starting to understand with science that there is this interconnectedness, this synthesis, really, that goes beyond the limitations that we see today. So by seeing space as limited, by seeing time as limited, we can't move forward. When we start getting the consciousness to move and see this as a movement of life, as an interconnected reality, then we can start moving into that new reality. We have to have new realities.
The keys spell out specific patterns in genetics dealing with the code system we call the DNA RNA. The keys tell us that RNA came before DNA. Now we're discovering 40 years later that the RNA
what does that
is
mean?
a process of evolution. In other words, the transmission of communication in the building blocks of life come first from the RNA to the DNA rather than as it is.
Wait, break that down a little bit. RNA
Well,
is...
RNA is actually usually the transcription process. DNA is the holding process of the codes. But from research now going on, especially at the University of California, Santa Cruz, the idea is that RNA may have come first. We'll take it.
What do you mean by transcription?
Well, that the codes themselves start moving out and creating proteins and amino acids. But one of the research that we've been involved with a scientist in Russia, is Peter Gurayev. And this is even more exciting because he talks about DNA as a waveform, that you can actually influence DNA. And you take that one step further to the work of Luc Montagnier,
Nobel Prize winner,
who actually has come out, and many people don't take him seriously, but he won a Nobel Prize for actually the AIDS virus. And now his next step came in a laboratory, and his next step was to show that DNA could be transferred by energy frequencies.
Oh, DNA, like in our cells, can be transferred to another cell? And is that how it actually happens?
Well, actually, he used a 7 hertz, approximately almost like 7, close to the Schumann resonance
Of the Earth.
To actually vibrate that DNA and to transfer it in a vibratory frequency into water, so that the water actually contained the DNA, but not in a physical form. This means that DNA can actually spread throughout the universe.
It's transphysical.
And do you think that's actually how DNA came to Earth?
We say, well, if we're talking about energy and consciousness, DNA was first a wave. And this is what
the keys of DNA tell us, that we are part of a transcription process of life that is through the modulation of wave frequencies.
Wait, let me see if I can absorb that. So you're saying that life came to planet Earth as a waveform from the universe that sparked individual life here and has evolved it, and it's a wave pattern of energy? It's not a particle material form?
Exactly.
It's first a wave pattern of energy. It then becomes, of course, the physical form. And this is why DNA can spread throughout the universe. And of course, you know, Alan, from our research, that we think that we perhaps also exist on other planets, like Adamic species. We call ourselves the Adamic race.
But what's the implications of that in science and medicine and biology?
The implications would be, as the keys of Enoch illustrate, we are in human evolution connected with a much higher evolutionary process. We are a human mind, we are a global mind, we are a cosmic mind. In essence, we determine the paradigms we want to work with, or we can transcend these paradigms. And when we transcend these paradigms, we become transitional interdimensional beings capable of, shall we say, using the techniques of wave modulation to seed ourselves genetically into other planetary environments.
And it also means that the physical form is really a secondary form. The consciousness form, the coatings of light, is the primary form of who we really are.
Right, so this might be too science fiction, but is it possible to translate ourselves into a wave pattern and go to other planets in that way?
Well, beam me up, Scotty, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, is that what the base... If we translate our DNA into wave patterns, non-particle matter, non-matter, and become pure wave, we can travel anywhere throughout the universe.
Well, quantum physicists are saying this is a future possibility. Others say it's not possible with living matter. But, you know, if consciousness is hooking into the physical form, then that consciousness travels where the physical form of the codes exist.
But what's the interface between consciousness and the waveform DNA? How do those two relate?
Well, it's processing, that is to say, the information content through mental thought forms or mental pictures. And we're beginning to realize now through the findings of key scientists throughout the world that just as the mind absorbs tremendous realms of information more quickly through mental pictures, the same process of realizing the power of mind over matter also allows us potentially to reprogram our own genetic code, our own DNA, RNA. So what we're saying is science has outstripped science fiction. We're now dealing with real highly qualified scientists who've been in the field of major think tanks for 30 or 40 years, who are beginning to realize that consciousness is the hidden variable for quantum transitions. It's not statistical information about a mind that has all the information that consciousness comes out of the brain, but rather that the material universe as well as the mental comes out of consciousness itself. Consciousness rising is the basis for approaching the new reality of the cosmic creation that's opening to us.
And this is what Eben Alexander, he was, of course, a Harvard neurosurgeon, has discovered from his own near-death experience. And that is that the brain does not create consciousness, but the brain is a type of receiver of consciousness.
But let me just say, a lot of people use the word consciousness, and I don't think I can even hear it anymore because it's just so overused. It's like the substitute for God. What is consciousness? I mean, I have a sense. It's like observer mind, but I just want to call you on that a little bit and go a little deeper.
Well, I think Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have talked about this, that there's many possibilities of thought out there in the universe. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can actually, if I wanted to, and many people have shown this to actually tune into your thoughts. So there's
I know we can do that.
But there's thoughts all around. You can see that with a cell phone. Oftentimes, you're thinking about someone calls, so you're tuning in.
There's a field of
but the idea is that there's many thoughts, many possibilities, and what they're saying is that the brain actually reduces that to one possibility in yourself. So that's consciousness. The consciousness is actually the field of many possibilities, and your brain reduces it down to one possibility that you choose.
So it's in a sense like the ocean. Okay, the ocean is called the field of consciousness, and who we think we are is these individual drops within the ocean. But we're really the ocean extracting a small piece of this thing we're calling ourselves.
But I always like to say one thing about that, because many people pick up the easy thought forms, and it's usually the negative thought forms or the thought forms that say, I can't, I don't want to, all that. But they have to realize that any possibility is out there that they can pick up on in their thoughts. So really, you can change yourself from being negative thinking all the time to positive thinking and positive solutions. That's really important.
So the key to your work is that we exist in a field, and DNA is a waveform within this field of consciousness. And when we learn the science of mind, we can start to direct this in key passages that will awaken a greater humanity.
This well said. I would just amend that by saying mind too, a greater mind working with the idea that it is not localized, it can expand in any direction.
So what is the implications for the human race with those ideas?
The human race is at a threshold where it's not only discovering its greater potential, but also through input from other disciplines in the areas of space science, exploration, in terms of the micro-universe that we're discovering, that we are a living membrane between a micro-universe and a macro-universe. We are beginning to realize that we are transitional beings discovering a greater evolutionary process that connects us with what I will call the cosmic others, the cosmic civilizations, the great philosophers of the East and the West have spoken about in their poetry and prose centuries ago. We're beginning to realize that we are part of a more dynamic universe, and that as we put our energies together as little spark plugs, we create this global mind, ultimately this cosmic evolutionary process that is the combination of the infinite way, the infinite specieshood, and ultimately the redefinition of the mind of the godhood within us. We are embryo gods waking up to the divine experience that we share as co-evolutionary subjects.
It also means our thoughts are not limited, because technically we can think of anything that's taking place on the planet, and we know many times there's a scientific fulfillment that's taking place, and people get it all over the world. It's almost a simultaneous brainstorm. Or
the morphogenetic field.
Exactly, because that's what people start thinking about. They're able to bring that in. When we travel around the world, it's amazing what people will say in the remotest parts of Africa and Brazil and here. They're all starting to think about the same thoughts, the same ideas. So it's interesting to see that these possibilities, these understandings are really cosmic, or at least global.
So we're really at this evolutionary threshold is really what your work is
about. The quantum leap or jump.
To what?
Into new being, capital B.
We are become new beings.
Exactly. With no limits, not even the umbilical cord with Mother Earth. We're able to set ourselves free as what I will call not humankind, but space kind. That we are able to circumnavigate into stellar clusters and even beyond, not ourselves, but our progeny, our offspring. As we remove ourselves from basically sitting on a third rock, we move from our sun, called planet Earth. We're beginning to realize the mediocrity of the bottom below consciousness the keys of Enoch speak of, and we begin to bootstrap through a higher positive sense of programming that we are dynamic beings that share this process that connects with a living creation.
And we share this universe with an infinitude of beings that are not, of course, limited to planet Earth, but the mindset of human beings have to change in order to embrace the other.
And this is our other work at the Academy for Future Science, our work with astronaut Gordon Cooper, astronauts that we have known throughout the world, and even one of the Russian cosmonauts who claimed that when they were in space that they saw technologies from other civilizations, or what the indigenous people of Brazil would call the star people or the star nations, that seem to be concerned about the misuse of science as we've applied it in a very provincial, parochial sense of nation-state power, and what we'll call the militarism of the 20th century, which of course has brought us to the brink of a biospheric collapse of the resources of Mother Earth.
And of course, this is our work with the Keys of Enoch that says it's not just extraterrestrial intelligence that exists in the universe. That's, of course, a great step forward for many people on planet Earth. But it's also the beings that are beyond the physical form. We call them the ultra-terrestrial beings, which are really profound and actually usually here to help us. They're trying to give us those right thought forms. They're trying to really assist us in moving forward.
So as we reach towards them in a sense where we can transcend the limited prejudices and our very small perspective, we reach towards them, they reach towards us. Is that what you're saying?
There is a dialogue that grows within as we discover ourselves within the larger family of nations. And it's the realization that our human language has been largely, should we say, linear and locking us into old paradigms or ways of formulating our concepts. By using pictures through our books, such as The Over Self-Awakening, and realizing that all cultures are connected, as we see here in this particular, what I call cosmogram or cosmic picture, we reorientate our mind to think beyond the third dimension, cosmically, in connecting all the critical factors of not only the movements of thought in the East and West, but also the larger picture of rediscovering through a new ontology of life, a new scientific definition of what is science, what is scientific truth, what is the purpose of evolution, and how this, shall we say, recapitulates itself in the sense of the joy of life and the purpose with all humanity as brothers and sisters for real, not just in an abstract, but in a very real sense.
Now think of it, though. If life is really based on consciousness, and the thinking that we share is able to manifest different ways of our lives and those around us. If we sit there and say, there is no life beyond, there is nothing else, we're limiting ourselves from being able to move forward, from actually asking for help and getting that co-participation that we say that helps direct the thoughts to something much more greater, something more universal, something more forward-thinking.
Well, you guys are at the edge. You've explored realities, you explored possibilities. Your life work is about investigating, but how can the common humanity start to activate a new cognitive awareness in meeting these beings, because they do not function on the same level you cannot sit down and have a conversation. Their field of consciousness actually distorts our ways of thinking. We have to embrace them in a new cognitive awareness. And how do you suggest we do that?
Well, if we start first, of course, with the understanding that they're interested in our sharing. They're interested in our growth. That's the first phase I think we have to understand. And you think that's true? Yes, I do. Okay. I think there's different levels of intelligence. Some are not interested, but hopefully the ones that we want to evolve into, to be sharing with, we'll say, are those that want us to share with them.
Okay.
And so this is possible now because in the age of the information revolution, we have what I call a university without walls. We can reach the people of interest in futurism throughout the world more directly, and they can download information far more quickly as we make the transition from a carbon-based humanity to a silicon-based humanity. We can learn in a few months that which would take the whole lifetime of scholarship,
right,
to bring different disciplines together, to network more directly, and to see, shall we say, a social media that can galvanize people into critical mass. But the other important aspect is we have found through our work with leading musicians, such as Carlos Santana and others, who can reach millions upon millions of people, that the use of certain energy mantras in musical settings, in musical dramatizations of brotherhood and sisterhood, can raise humanity from the death state or the negative, what I call culture of violence, into a culture of peace and culture of harmony. And that's the transition.
Is that what you were going to say, Desiree?
Well, we work with the idea that we can collectively move forward, and many people are pessimistic about this planet, but we're not.
I'm not either. I think there's a great planet. It's worth saving, and it's a beautiful place to be.
And there's solutions. That's the important thing.
And the future only looks better from here.
Once we make a decision to be architects of a new dawn, to be artistically, philosophically, sociologically aware that there is a positive future that's being prepared for us in conjunction with what I will call our cosmic counterparts.
But I still want to know about cognitive awareness. Sound can shift the way we think, but how does the common person shift their reality so they can meet these other beings?
Well, I think thoughts become things, and we have to choose the good ones. So really choosing the thoughts that we think are extremely important. And we can do this by meditation, we can do this by prayer, we can do this by just simply awakening the mind to other possibilities.
And
also trusting ourselves, trusting the gifts we have that is part of a much greater aspect. So what I will call the supermind, or some would call the super knowledge, the great tradition of the Tibetan sages. Even in the Western sense of the biblical prophets, the Essenes, the early Christian mystics, there was a sense that there was a greater spiritual synthesis that was possible when good minds would come together. This was called the neshama, the soul-spirit marriage. And the integration has to be a realization in the public arena of the musical cues, the cultural cues, the educational processes that can be amplified more quickly and more directly.
Well, I'm very happy about your work at Future Science, because you're combining the ideas of consciousness, the spiritual aspects, with a concrete way of tracking it through musicology and linguistics as a science, and a science of new understanding. So you're planting seeds of possibility, so when people see this program, they will have at least an awakening of what's possible.
Actually, almost everything is possible, so I hope people realize that. Even every thought that you have is a possible manifestation, and that's so important to understand. So let's think about really making a difference on planet Earth, really getting new technologies of energy, of medicine, all aspects.
Because everything is going to do the quantum jump together. From medicine to astronomy to genetics, everything, according to the blueprint that I was momentarily shown, is going to take this quantum leap. And so we tell our audience to see yourselves as participants in this great university without walls. See yourself as a process of a higher spiral of information that's going to cut across all cultural, linguistic, and religious barriers, in defining a whole new world civilization that's going to come really in through the realization that we are this active verb of the I am that I am, rediscovering itself.
And that's the work of the Keys of Enoch. It was 64 areas of science that will move forward to get us into, we'll say, the real connection with greater levels of intelligence.
That's a synthesis right there. You guys watch it again so you get it, so you start to have it all come together, because future plans, future science, a way of activating greater brain possibilities is what Calling in the Future is all about. Your work is so important. How can people reach you?
Right, we have two major websites. One is keysofenoch.org, and the other is futurescience.org.
Thank you both for being here. Doctors J.J. Hurtak, Dr. Desiree Hurtak at the Academy for Future Science. I'm Alan Steinfeld for Synthesis. Thanks for watching.